Welcome to Dreamtale Sleep Stories. Tonight's reading is The School for Rejected Superheroes. Settle into your bed or sofa and let your shoulders, jaw, and eyelids grow heavy. Inhale slowly. 1, 2, 3, and sigh the air away, allowing the day to fade into quiet dark. With every soft inhale, you invite fresh English phrases. With every gentle exhale, stray thoughts drift farther off. Behind my voice flows a gentle melody, renowned for guiding the mind toward deep relaxation. Keep your eyes closed or follow the captions, whichever feels right. Simply receive the rhythm and resonance of the language. Deep in rest, tonight's phrases will take root like seeds, ready to bloom into stronger English skills with the morning light. When you feel settled, hold that unhurried breath and allow yourself to drift into the tale. The School for Rejected Superheroes begins now, and when the story's final line has faded, the music will linger a little longer, carrying you gently deeper into sleep. The School for Rejected Superheroes. Kevin Martinez had always known he was different, but not in the way most 16-year-old boys hoped to be different. While other kids his age worried about acne or whether their crush liked them back, Kevin worried about accidentally making his socks invisible at the worst possible moments. It had started 3 years ago during gym class. Coach Williams was making the class run laps, and Kevin was desperately wishing he could disappear rather than face another humiliating last place finish. Suddenly, he looked down and screamed. His feet appeared to be floating in his sneakers, completely sockless, even though he distinctly remembered putting on his lucky blue socks that morning. The other students laughed, thinking it was some kind of magic trick. Kevin spent the rest of the day trying to figure out what had happened, only to discover that his socks were still there. They were just completely invisible. By the time he got home, they had mysteriously returned to normal visibility, leaving Kevin wondering if he was losing his mind. Over the next few months, it happened again and again. Always when he was stressed, always just his socks, and always at the most embarrassing moments possible. During his driver's test, the examiner was convinced Kevin was wearing flip-flops and failed him on the spot. At his cousin's wedding, Aunt Martha spent the entire reception telling people that Kevin had no respect for formal occasions because he wore dress shoes without socks. Kevin's parents took him to doctors, psychologists, and even a magician named the Amazing Fernando, who advertised his services in the local newspaper. Nobody could explain it, and most people didn't believe it was happening at all. His parents began to think Kevin was acting out for attention, and his younger sister Emma started calling him Crazy Socks, a nickname that unfortunately stuck at school. Everything changed the day Kevin received a letter that was definitely not delivered by the regular postal service. He was sitting in his bedroom, trying to do homework while simultaneously concentrating on keeping his socks visible. He had learned that focusing really hard sometimes helped, when something tapped against his window. Kevin looked up to see a small drone hovering outside his second-story bedroom window. Attached to its mechanical arm was an envelope addressed to Kevin Martinez, SOC Invisibility Specialist. His heart nearly stopped. Someone knew about his weird ability and had given it an official-sounding title. With trembling hands, he opened the window and retrieved the envelope. Inside was a letter written on the strangest paper he had ever seen. It seemed to shimmer and change colors depending on how he held it. "Dear Mr. Martinez," the letter began in elegant handwriting that seemed to move slightly on the page. "We are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to the Academy for Specialized Individuals, a unique educational institution for young people with extraordinary but highly specific abilities. Your talent for selective textile invisibility has been noted by our recruitment department, and we believe you would be an excellent addition to our student body." Kevin read the letter 3 times before it sank in. There was a school for people like him? People with weird, seemingly useless superpowers? The letter continued with details about enrollment, and at the bottom was a small note. "Please pack light. Transportation will be provided tomorrow at 3:17 p.m. sharp. Look for the purple school bus." Kevin barely slept that night. Part of him was convinced it was an elaborate prank, probably organized by his sister. But another part of him, the part that had felt alone and freakish for 3 years, desperately hoped it was real. The next day, Kevin told his parents he was going to a friend's house to study and positioned himself at the corner of his street at exactly 3:15 p.m. At 3:17 on the dot, the most unusual vehicle Kevin had ever seen rumbled around the corner. It was indeed purple, but calling it a school bus was like calling a rocket ship a bicycle. The vehicle was twice the size of a normal bus, with windows that seemed to show different views depending on your angle. Sometimes clouds, sometimes ocean, sometimes what looked like outer space. The door opened with a soft whoosh, revealing a cheerful woman with bright pink hair, wearing what appeared to be a conductor's uniform. "Kevin Martinez?" she asked, consulting a clipboard that was floating in midair beside her. "SOC Invisibility?" Yes," Kevin replied, still staring at the floating clipboard. "Wonderful. I'm Miss Rodriguez, your transportation coordinator. Please climb aboard. We have 6 more pickups before we reach the academy." Kevin stepped onto the bus and immediately understood that this was no ordinary vehicle. The interior was 3 times larger than the exterior should have allowed, with comfortable seats that adjusted themselves to each passenger's height and preferred cushioning. Soft music played from an invisible source, and the temperature was perfectly comfortable, despite the fact that Kevin couldn't see any air conditioning vents. "Physics work a little differently around here," Miss Rodriguez explained, noticing Kevin's amazed expression. "You'll get used to it. Take any seat you like. They're all good ones." As the bus began to move, Kevin looked around at his fellow passengers. In the seat across from him sat a girl about his age with curly red hair, who was apparently making faces at herself in a hand mirror. When she noticed Kevin watching, she smiled and waved. "Hi," she said cheerfully. "I'm Lucy. My power is that I can make myself look exactly like I did 5 minutes ago, but only for 30 seconds at a time, and only on Tuesdays between 2 and 4 p.m. Kevin blinked. "That's very specific. Tell me about it," Lucy laughed. "What's your thing?" I can make my socks invisible, Kevin admitted, waiting for the usual laughter or disbelief. Instead, Lucy's eyes lit up. That's so cool. Is it just socks, or can you do other footwear? Just socks, Kevin said, surprised by her enthusiasm. And only when I'm stressed or embarrassed, which is unfortunately most of the time. Emotional triggers are the worst, agreed a boy sitting a few seats ahead. He turned around to face them, revealing a face covered in what appeared to be very precisely arranged freckles. I'm Marcus. I can rearrange my freckles into different patterns, but only into shapes that start with the letter Q. Like what? Kevin asked, genuinely curious. Marcus concentrated for a moment, and his freckles began to move across his face like tiny brown ants, arranging themselves into a perfect square. Question marks, quadrilaterals, and quail silhouettes, he said proudly. Very useful for, well, nothing really, but it looks neat. The next pickup was a tall, thin boy named Oliver, who could make himself exactly 3½ inches taller, but only while humming show tunes. This was followed by a girl named Zoe, who could predict what someone was going to have for lunch exactly 24 hours in advance, but only on weekdays and only for people whose names started with vowels. The final pickup was perhaps the most unusual yet. The bus stopped in front of a small house, and a girl emerged who appeared to be walking normally, until Kevin realized that she was actually floating exactly 2 millimeters off the ground. She had to concentrate to make her feet actually touch the surface when she walked. That's Emma Chen, Miss Rodriguez explained. Involuntary micro-levitation, completely useless for any practical purpose, but it does make her an excellent dancer since she never quite touches the floor. As the bus filled with these wonderfully weird individuals, Kevin felt something he hadn't experienced in 3 years. He felt normal. Not because his power was normal, none of their powers were normal, but because he was surrounded by people who understood what it was like to have an ability that was extraordinary and completely impractical at the same time. The Academy for Specialized Individuals was unlike any school Kevin had ever imagined. It looked like a cross between a medieval castle and a space station, with towers that twisted impossibly into the sky, and bridges that connected buildings while floating freely in midair. The grounds were filled with students practicing their abilities. A boy who could make flowers grow, but only plastic ones. A girl who could speak any language perfectly, but only when she was underwater. Twins who could read each other's minds, but only when they were thinking about cheese. Kevin's dormitory roommate turned out to be a quiet boy named David, who had the ability to make any electronic device work exactly 12% better than intended, but only for 17 minutes at a time. Their room was surprisingly normal, except for the fact that the ceiling showed a constantly changing view of different skies from around the world. The Academy was founded in 1987 by Professor Elizabeth Thornwright, David explained as they unpacked their belongings. She had the power to make anyone tell her the truth, but only about what they had for breakfast. Seems useless, right? But it turned out she could solve mysteries and help police with criminal investigations, because guilty people always lie about their breakfast when they're nervous. Kevin was amazed. She solved crimes with breakfast questions? Dozens of them, David confirmed. That's when she realized that there's no such thing as a useless superpower, just powers that haven't found their proper application yet. So she started this school to help people like us figure out how to use our abilities in creative ways. The classes at the academy were unlike anything in regular school. Instead of traditional subjects, students took courses like creative application theory, timing and precision, teamwork with unusual abilities, and finding your niche in the world. Kevin's favorite class quickly became power development with Professor Martinez, no relation, despite the shared last name. Professor Martinez had the ability to make any printed text appear in a font that was exactly perfect for whoever was reading it. Not particularly useful until she became a reading specialist and helped thousands of children with dyslexia. The key, Professor Martinez explained during Kevin's first week, is to stop thinking about what your power can't do and start exploring what it can do. Kevin, you've been focusing on the fact that you can only affect socks. But let's examine this more carefully. Show me. Kevin concentrated, feeling the familiar surge of embarrassment that usually triggered his ability. His white athletic socks promptly vanished from sight, though he could still feel them on his feet. Interesting, Professor Martinez mused, walking around Kevin and observing from different angles. Class, what do you notice? Lucy raised her hand. The socks are completely invisible, but his shoes aren't floating. So the socks are still there, still providing cushioning and support. Exactly, Professor Martinez exclaimed. This isn't destruction or teleportation. This is selective optical manipulation. Kevin, have you ever tried to make just part of a sock invisible? Kevin frowned. No, I never thought about that. Let's try. But first, let your socks return to normal. Kevin relaxed, and his socks flickered back into visibility. Then, following Professor Martinez's instructions, he tried to concentrate on making just the toe portion of his left sock invisible. To his amazement, it worked. His big toe appeared to be poking through the front of his shoe, while the rest of his sock remained visible. Fascinating, Professor Martinez clapped her hands together. You have precise control over your ability. You just never knew it. With practice, you might be able to create patterns, messages, or even artistic designs. For the first time since his power had manifested, Kevin felt excited about it instead of embarrassed. The weeks that followed were the happiest of Kevin's life. He made friends who understood his struggles and teachers who helped him see his ability in a new light. He learned that Oliver's height-changing ability made him an excellent scout when combined with his musical talents. He could hum while observing dangerous situations from a slightly elevated position. Zoe's lunch prediction power had actually helped prevent 3 food poisoning incidents at other schools before she transferred to the academy. Even Emma's micro-levitation had practical applications. She never left footprints, could walk across delicate surfaces without leaving marks, and had an uncanny ability to sneak up on people since her feet never quite made contact with the ground. Kevin began to experiment more with his power. He discovered he could make complex patterns in his socks, spell out words, and even create what looked like windows in the fabric that showed the skin underneath. His confidence grew, and interestingly, as he became more comfortable with his ability, he found he could control it even when he wasn't stressed. Everything changed on a Tuesday afternoon in late October. Kevin was in Professor Martinez's class, practicing making his left sock display a pattern of polka dots while keeping his right sock completely normal, when the emergency alarms began blaring throughout the academy. Professor Martinez's expression immediately turned serious. "Students, please remain calm and follow emergency protocol. Return to your dormitories and wait for further instructions." But before anyone could move, the classroom door burst open and Professor Thornwright herself rushed in. Kevin had only seen the Academy's founder a few times, always from a distance. Up close, she was smaller than he had expected. With silver hair and kind eyes that currently looked very worried. "Elena," she said to Professor Martinez, "we need every available student. This isn't a drill." "What's happening?" Professor Martinez asked. "The Midnight Society has taken over the downtown Federal Building," Professor Thornwright explained quickly. "They're holding 37 people hostage, including the mayor and several city council members. They've made demands about normal humans versus enhanced individuals, and they claim they have a device that can permanently strip away superpowers." Kevin felt his stomach drop. The Midnight Society was a terrorist organization made up of people who believed that anyone with superpowers, no matter how minor or unusual, was a threat to normal humanity. They had been responsible for several attacks on superhero training facilities and had been growing bolder in recent months. "But Professor," Lucy said hesitantly, our powers aren't exactly the kind that stop bad guys." Professor Thornwright smiled grimly. "My dear, that's exactly why we might be the only ones who can help. The Midnight Society has planned for traditional superheroes. They've set up power dampeners, energy shields, and anti-flight fields around the building. They're prepared for people who can fly, or have super strength, or shoot energy beams. They're not prepared for a girl who can rearrange her freckles into Q shapes, or a boy who can make his socks invisible." The plan that Professor Thornwright outlined was unlike anything Kevin had ever heard of. Instead of a direct assault, they would use their seemingly useless abilities in unexpected ways to gather intelligence, create distractions, and ultimately outmaneuver the terrorists through sheer unpredictability. "Kevin," the professor said, "your selective textile invisibility could be crucial. If we can get you close enough to the building, you might be able to create visual signals or messages that the hostages can see, but the terrorists miss." Kevin's heart was pounding. "But what if I mess up? What if I can't control it when it really matters?" Professor Martinez put a hand on his shoulder. "Kevin, you've been practicing for weeks. You have more control now than you realize. And remember, the terrorists are expecting traditional powers. They won't know what to make of patterns appearing and disappearing on someone's socks. The Academy's response team consisted of 12 students, each chosen for how their unusual ability could contribute to the mission. Kevin would handle visual communications. Lucy would serve as a temporal reference point. Her ability to look like she had 5 minutes ago could help the team coordinate timing. Marcus would use his freckle patterns to send coded messages to other team members. Oliver would provide elevated reconnaissance while humming to maintain his height advantage. Emma would scout areas silently, since her micro-levitation meant she couldn't trigger pressure-sensitive alarms. David would ensure that any electronic equipment they needed would work just a little bit better when they needed it most. The other team members included Priya, who could make herself smell exactly like any type of bread, useful for creating distractions in ventilation systems. Jake, who could make any door sound like it was opening when it wasn't, perfect for misdirection. Nina, who could create small, temporary portals, but only between spaces that were painted the same color. And twins Alex and Sam, whose shared cheese-related telepathy could provide secure communication as long as they were both thinking about dairy products. It was the most ridiculous superhero team ever assembled, and Kevin couldn't help but think that was exactly what made it perfect. The federal building was surrounded by police cars, news vans, and official vehicles from several government agencies. The Midnight Society had chosen their target well. It was a 40-story building with multiple entrances, underground parking, and a complex layout that made traditional rescue operations extremely difficult. The Academy team approached from the east side, where David's enhanced electronics had identified a blind spot in the terrorists' surveillance coverage. Kevin's first task was to establish visual contact with the hostages, who intelligence suggested were being held on the 15th floor. Using a combination of Oliver's elevated position, he was humming My Fair Lady and had gained his extra 3.5 inches and some regular binoculars that David had improved to work 12% better. They identified a conference room where they could see people tied to chairs near the windows. "Okay, Kevin," Professor Thornwright's voice came through their earpieces. "We need you to get their attention and let them know help is coming. Can you create a message they can see from the window?" Kevin took a deep breath and concentrated. He was wearing long black socks today, which would provide good contrast for his message. Slowly, carefully, he began making parts of his socks invisible, creating letters that appeared to be floating above his shoes. First, he spelled out help on his left sock. One of the hostages, a woman in a business suit, noticed and nudged the person next to her. Soon, several people were looking toward the window. Next, Kevin created coming on his right sock, then stay and calm, alternating between his feet. The hostages began nodding slightly, and Kevin felt a surge of pride. His weird, embarrassing power was actually helping people. "Excellent work," Professor Thornwright's voice crackled through the earpiece. "Now we need intelligence. Can you ask them about the number of terrorists?" Kevin thought for a moment, then created a question mark on his left sock and held up his fingers, first one hand, then both hands, then repeated the pattern. He was asking, how many? The woman in the business suit was quick to understand. She held up one hand, then 3 fingers on the other hand. 8 terrorists. 8 confirmed, Kevin reported back to the team. Perfect, came the response. Phase 2 begins now. Phase 2 involved creating chaos and confusion throughout the building to divide the terrorists' attention. Jake positioned himself near a stairwell and began making doors sound like they were opening on floors where no one was actually entering. The terrorists started rushing back and forth, trying to investigate sounds that led nowhere. Meanwhile, Priya crawled through the ventilation system, filling different areas with the smell of fresh-baked bread. This created confusion among the terrorists, who couldn't figure out why their secure themes building suddenly smelled like a bakery, and began to suspect that someone had infiltrated their operation. Nina created small portals between areas painted the same shade of institutional beige. Fortunately, most government buildings had plenty of beige, allowing the team to pass notes and small equipment between floors without using the elevators or stairs. Alex and Sam positioned themselves on opposite sides of the building and maintained constant communication by thinking very hard about cheddar cheese, providing real-time updates on terrorist movements to the rest of the team. Kevin's role evolved as the situation developed. He became the primary communication link with the hostages, using his SOC messages to coordinate their actions and gather information. He learned that the terrorists had a device they claimed could permanently remove superpowers, that they planned to demand the closure of all superhero schools and training facilities, and that their leader was someone called the Normalizer, who wore a mask and seemed to have some kind of personal vendetta against anyone with abilities. The breakthrough came when Emma made a discovery during her silent scouting mission. Her micro-levitation allowed her to move through areas without triggering pressure plates or making footstep sounds. And she discovered that the terrorists' power-dampening device was actually just an elaborate fake, a collection of impressive-looking electronics that didn't actually do anything. "They're running a bluff," she reported through the Cheese telepathy network. "The machine is just for show." This changed everything. If the device was fake, then the terrorists' main advantage was psychological. They were counting on the fear of losing their powers to keep enhanced individuals from acting against them. Professor Thornwright's voice came through the earpieces. "New plan, everyone. We're going to call their bluff, but we need to do it in a way that exposes their deception without putting the hostages at risk." Kevin found himself at the center of the new strategy. His SOC messages had established him as a communication link with the hostages, and now he needed to coordinate a simultaneous action that would prove the terrorists' device was fake, while creating enough confusion for a rescue operation. Working with Nina's portals and David's enhanced electronics, Kevin was able to get a small camera phone to the hostages. Using his SOC messages, he instructed them to record the power-dampening device when the terrorists weren't looking. The footage, transmitted back through Nina's portals and David's improved phone signal, confirmed Emma's discovery. The device was an impressive-looking collection of random electronics, computer parts, old television components and what appeared to be pieces from several different vacuum cleaners, all wired together with flashing lights. "It's time for the grand finale," Professor Thornwright announced. "Kevin, we need you to deliver a message to the terrorists themselves. Are you ready?" Kevin's stomach fluttered with nervousness, but he nodded. "What do you want me to say?" "Tell them that their device doesn't work, and that we can prove it." Kevin took a deep breath and walked directly toward the main entrance of the federal building. His heart was pounding so hard, he was sure everyone could hear it. But he forced himself to concentrate on his socks. As he approached the glass doors, Kevin created the largest, clearest message he had ever attempted. Using both socks and the spaces between his toes, he spelled out, "Your machine is fake. We have proof." The message was visible to anyone looking down from the upper floors, and Kevin made sure to stand in a position where the terrorists would see it. Then, to drive the point home, he began cycling through demonstrations of everyone's powers that he could remember. Patterns that matched Marcus's freckle shapes. Timing sequences that corresponded to Lucy's temporal abilities. Even tiny floating letters that mimicked Emma's levitation. The effect was immediate. Kevin could hear shouting from inside the building, and through the glass doors, he saw terrorists running back and forth in confusion. Their entire plan had been based on the threat of their power-dampening device, and now that threat was revealed to be hollow. That's when the real superheroes arrived. While the academy students had been creating confusion and gathering intelligence, Professor Thornwright had been coordinating with the official superhero response team. The professionals had been waiting for the perfect moment to act, when the terrorists were distracted and their confidence was shaken. The rescue operation lasted exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. The official heroes, no longer worried about losing their powers to a fake device, made quick work of the confused and panicked terrorists. The hostages were safely evacuated, and the Midnight Society members were arrested without a single injury on either side. Kevin found himself standing in the lobby of the federal building, surrounded by real superheroes with impressive powers like flight, super strength, and energy projection. A few months ago, he would have felt completely insignificant in their presence. Now he realized something important. They couldn't have succeeded without the Academy team's unique contribution. "Excuse me," a voice said behind him. Kevin turned to see the woman in the business suit who had been among the hostages. "Are you the young man who was sending messages with your socks?" Kevin felt his cheeks turn red. Yes, ma'am. I wanted to thank you," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Councilwoman Sarah Chen. What you did in there, keeping us informed, keeping us calm, that was real heroism. You should be proud." As Kevin shook her hand, he realized that Councilwoman Chen was right. For the first time in his life, he was genuinely proud of his unusual ability. The ride back to the academy was celebratory, but quiet. Everyone was exhausted, but there was a sense of accomplishment that Kevin had never experienced before. They had used their useless powers to save lives and stop bad guys, just like real superheroes. "You know what I realized today?" Lucy said, as the purple bus rumbled through the evening darkness. "We're not rejected superheroes at all. We're just superheroes that nobody expected." Kevin smiled and looked down at his socks, which were currently displaying a pattern of small stars he had created just for fun. "I like that better," he said. "Academy for Unexpected Superheroes. That has a nice ring to it," agreed Marcus, whose freckles were currently arranged in the shape of a question mark, though Kevin suspected it was actually supposed to be a Q for qualified. As the academy came into view, its impossible towers twinkling with lights that defied conventional physics, Kevin realized that he had finally found where he belonged. Not because his power was normal, but because it was extraordinary in its own weird, wonderful way. Professor Thornwright's voice came over the bus's intercom system. "Students, what you accomplished today proves something I've believed for 37 years. There are no useless superpowers, only superpowers that haven't found their moment yet. You should all be very proud." Kevin settled back in his automatically adjusting seat and closed his eyes. Tomorrow there would be classes and practice and probably homework. But tonight he was content to ride through the darkness in a bus that was bigger on the inside than the outside, surrounded by friends who could rearrange freckles and predict lunch menus and make electronics work 12% better. And if his socks happened to display a few invisible thank you messages to the universe as he dozed off, well, that was between him and his feet. The next morning, Kevin woke up to find a new letter on his nightstand. This one was written on normal paper, in normal ink, with normal handwriting. It was from his parents. "Dear Kevin," it began, "we saw the news about what happened at the Federal Building yesterday. We didn't understand everything, but we understood enough to know that our son was part of something important and heroic. We're proud of you, and we're sorry we didn't believe you before. Love, Mom and Dad. P.S. Emma says to tell you that Crazy Socks is officially retired as a nickname. From now on, she's calling you Super Socks." Kevin smiled and carefully folded the letter. Then he looked down at his feet and concentrated. Slowly, the words "thank you" appeared across both socks in elegant, invisible script. Some powers he had learned were perfect exactly as they were.